Alrighty class, here is your lesson on square roots. Now all the examples I have here are examples that we should be able to just do in our heads. So let's start with the square root of 4. The key is to recognize that 4 is 2 times 2. Once you have the same number times itself inside of a square root, the square root goes away and the answer is just that number. So for square root of 9, hopefully you recognize that 9 is the same as 3 times 3. And now I could just bring out the 3 and the answer is 3. Likewise, hopefully you recognize 16 is 4 times 4, and that's going to give us a 4. 25 is, so the square root of 25 is the same as the square root of 5 times 5, which becomes a 5. And after you get good at this, hopefully you can just kind of skip this step when you see something like this. 36 is 6 times 6, so the square root of 36 is 6. Now let's say you have something like the square root of 200. If you're able to recognize that, hey, 200 is 10 times 10 times 2, and you see that you have two 10s, the 10 comes out of the square root and the 2 stays inside. So the square root of 200 simplified turns out to be 10 times the square root of 2. Now something like the square root of 45, we know that 45 is 9 times 5, and 9 is 3 times 3. So there it is. I have two 3's, so I can bring the 2 3 to one 3 outside of the square root. And my final answer here is 3 times the square root of 5. If I have something like the square root of 80, and I break 80 up into its multiples. Now, thinking it through a bit, 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, and I know 8 times 10 is 80, and 2 times 5 gives me a 10. So all of this is 80. Now notice I have two 2's here and two 2's here. So I can bring out two 2's. Those two 2's multiplied by themselves will give me a 4. And so here's my final answer. Something like a square root of 1,000 can be looked at as the square root of 10 times 10 times 10. Now I only have two 10's here, so I can only bring one 10 out. So my final answer here is 10 times the square root of 10. Now, just a really quick lesson on multiplication and where we might see a square root. Consider the problem 3 times 3. If you consider moving to the right on an x-axis 3 spots and then moving up 3 spots, you can see that in between here you're going to have exactly 9 single unit squares. And so here, this is why 3 times 3 is 9. But the square root of 9 is, in fact, 3. Now, if you are ever given a problem where the variable you want is squared, you have to take the square root of it in order to get the variable by itself. So in this case, I'd have to take the square root of both sides of these. Now when you actually do that, you end up having to have two answers. That's why I have a plus and minus here. For our geometry class, we're not going to deal with the plus and minus, so here I won't require this. Just know that the square root of something squared brings that something out, but you have to take the square root of whatever's on the other side of the equation. And in this case, the square root of 9 becomes 3. So here I have a problem. Hey, if x squared equals 16, then what is just x? Well, two numbers times themselves has to become 16. Now this is an easy problem, so maybe you could do this in your head, but still the proper operation is to take the square root of this, so x comes out by itself, and hopefully you know that two numbers times itself becomes 16, and that number has to be 4. Now if you're presented with a problem like this, 37, kind of difficult to know what number times what will give me 37, but still, if I just want to know what x is, I still take the square root of both sides. And if it turns out it's a problem that you can't really easily do in your head, just leave it like this. So x equals the square root of 37. If I have x squared equals 213, well, x will have to equal the square root of 213. If x squared equaled the prime number 71, hopefully by now you would know that x equals the square root of 71. Now, if x squared equaled something weird like, say, a squared plus b squared, and I just wanted to know what x is, I take the square root of both sides, and it turns out that x equals the square root of a squared plus b squared. Alright class, that's your lesson on square roots. Have a great day.